Hey, this is Paul, and I'm making another A Course in Miracles video. I'm parked in the apartment complex where I live, and there's a pond over there that it would have been nice to go outside and show you some stuff, but weather's pretty nasty cold today, even though the sun's out. So today's topic some would maybe not consider to be an A Course in Miracles topic, but it is, because God's nature and God's mind is holographic. And so I'm going to be talking about what a hologram is, how it works, what it means, why God is a holographic creator, and what that implies, what that means. I'm going to talk about God's omnipresent nature, and that will help you to see why this physical world was made to block awareness of God's presence and how it does that, and why this is a dream and why it's a holographic dream. If you can understand how holograms work, and I know many people don't understand this, and this might be totally new to many of you, and so I'm going to try to make it as simple as I can. Holy Spirit, help me with this. So let's see, where can we begin? Some decades ago, there was an interesting book that came out called The Holographic Universe. I don't know if you've heard of it or read it, but if you've read it, then you have a leg up here. It was a scientific theory that was put forth to try to explain some properties of black holes and things, and so maybe I'll just describe to begin with what is a hologram and how does it work. So a physical object showing up in three-dimensional space, like my body or a cup or a dog or whatever, or you see on the movies, sometimes you see there's like a 3D image that's sort of transparent and flickering and Star Wars kind of a thing, but or the Star Trek holodeck. That is not a hologram. It's just sort of an idea of a projected image that sort of comes from somewhere. It's not the proper definition of a hologram. So what a hologram basically means is you have something that's the whole. That could be an image of something, it could be an object or a god or whatever, some kind of whole. And that whole is projected down into a tiny point, and also projected down into another tiny point, and also into another tiny point. So you end up with these little points in space which contain the whole. Each one of them has like the whole picture condensed down into this point. And I don't know if you've seen this on credit cards, where you have a little hologram on your credit card where you have like maybe a picture of a dove or something, and as you move the card, you actually can see three-dimensionally. You can see other angles of this object. You don't just sort of see a flat thing. You actually see a three-dimensional image. As you look around it, you actually can see other sides of it that you couldn't see before, because it's a hologram, and each little particle of that image contains not just like one snapshot of a certain viewpoint or a certain angle looking at that object. It actually contains lots of angles, lots of pictures of different angles of that object in each part. So every part of that picture, every little pixel, every little grain of that picture actually contains multiple images or multiple sets of information stored there so that when you move your vantage point, you see a slightly different angle, you get to glimpse a slightly different picture. I don't know if you've seen these things. They used to be able to get these plastic kind of images where the image was like a piece of plastic that the surface is like a wave like this with peaks and valleys, and a printer would print in a certain direction like this. It print an image onto each of those peaks. So like say this is a peak, only this corner of the peak would have that particle of the image on it, and then the printer would move around and it would print another picture here, so it doesn't overlap the other picture's particles. So you're sort of storing a picture on the top of the hills, and then you store another picture on the other side of the hills. So then, depending on what your vantage point is, you only see the particles of the image that were on this side of the hill. So like when you're over here, you can only see this side of the bumps on the surface. So you only see what color is there. So that creates a picture. If you move around, all of a sudden the picture kind of shifts and you suddenly see another image, and then you go over here, you see another image, and you could like sort of like flex this thing back and forth, and you could sort of see little animations maybe, or objects that move, or different scenes or whatever, because you've got multiple sets of information stored in each little part of the picture. So the idea of a hologram is very similar to that, in that you take the whole and you bring it down and store all of it in one place, and then you do that again, you store all of it in another place, all of it in another place, such that when you change your vantage point, you see different aspects of the whole, but every part contains the whole and is almost like, this is the whole image right here. Here's the whole image. Here's the whole image. And the interesting thing is, so you've got this image with all these little miniaturized snapshots of the whole in each little part of the image. If you cut the image in half, and you lose half of the physical image, all of the information is still in the other half. Every single piece of what's left, every dot, every little point that has the whole picture in it, still contains the whole of the information, which is quite bizarre to get your head around this. It's like not like a typical photograph where you just have this one imprinted image from one angle. You actually have almost like the whole scene from every possible angle is stored in each piece of the image. You lose a big chunk of the image and you don't actually lose any of the information, because it's all stored here and it's all stored here and all of it's stored over here and over here. So this comes down to the holographic idea, which is the whole is in every part. So you had a picture of a rose, and the picture of the rose is placed into this part, and it's also placed into this part and this part, and you shine a laser light through this special kind of interference pattern image, and you get a whole rose out of it. Chop off a piece of that pattern and project the laser light through it, and you still get a picture of a whole rose through it, because every piece of the picture has the whole of the information in it. So like little reflections of the whole, little versions of the whole thing. So what they found was they did some tests in some lab rats where they trained the rats to go around a maze, and they learned the maze, and then they thought, okay, where is the memory in the brain that stores the learning of where to go? So in kind of a nasty way, they started chopping out pieces of the brain, and it found that they could not stop the rats from knowing where to go once they'd learned it, no matter which part of the brain they took away. So it started to indicate that all of the learning is in every part of the brain. And there was also another example, I think, from that book where a physical human, had some kind of brain problem, really severe problem, where they had a huge chunk of their brain that they had to have removed, they had to have it removed, and after it was removed, you would have thought that there would be some concrete portion of their learning or their memories that would have been lost, and the other stuff in the other parts of the brain would be retained. But what actually happened was they still had all of their memories. They didn't lose anything, because all those memories are not just stored in one place. It's like all of the memories are in every location in the brain. So over here, there's my entire life. Over here, there's my entire life. Up here, there's my entire life. Chop a piece of the brain out, and you still have a full picture. You're able to get back a full picture. All that the person experienced was that they had their memories still, but they were slightly fuzzier. There was, so like, say you had like 55 different copies of the same memory all over the place. Now you've gone down to 35 copies. There's not quite as many references, or not quite as much sort of a shared build-up of sense of what happened. So it became a bit less clear, but every detail was still there. And this is why they suggested that the brain is actually holographic, in that everything is stored everywhere. So, so not just it's stored in one place. Here's one memory. This one memory is everywhere, and you take away parts, and it still can get that same information back in your memory, because it's fully stored in every place. So it's kind of mind-boggling to get your head around this, but so then they suggested, well, maybe the whole universe is like this, where it seems as though everything is finite and separated off, but effectively the whole universe is stored in every location in the universe. So my brain stores the whole universe in it. Your brain has the whole universe in it. Everybody individually has like a copy of the whole thing. We're all joined together by this sharing of information. And then there's a very interesting thing that happens called the quantum entanglement. This is part of quantum physics, where what they found is that they can actually get a particle over here that's a very big distance away, many miles away from a particle here, like photons or whatever, and changes that you make to this one instantaneously occur in this one, even though they're separated by space, and even though it violates the speed of light, and you can't possibly have some kind of a communication that goes linearly through time to get to the other particle. Both of them change at once, instantly, with no time delay. This is called quantum entanglement, as if there's two things that are sort of tangled together. Somehow they share existence in different locations. This is also part of the holographic idea that a certain piece of information is not just stored in one place, it's in multiple places. And this is one way in which this holographic dream universe sort of reveals its flaws or its underlying nature, that in certain situations you can prove that an object is in two places at once. And when it seems like most things are not in two places at once, or everything's different, or nothing is really connected, or you don't share with anything else, that is a big illusion that the ego has painted. So God is the whole. God, when he creates like himself, and he creates parts within himself that contain all of him. There is a short segment in the Course itself that does say the idea of a whole in every part, and yet every part is a whole and shares with the whole. This is how God thinks. So it's literally saying God's mind, God's way of creating, isn't just like, okay, God is a thing and then it creates a thing that's separate. God is creating holographically by taking the whole of himself and putting it into a part. So this part right here now contains all of God and is so fully given that it essentially is a whole within itself. And yet at the same time, there are many other parts that are doing the same thing. Simultaneously, all of God is over here, all of God is here, all of God is here. Individuals in heaven who are parts of God, or they are autonomous beings that are whole within themselves, within God, but each one of them is intimately sort of joined to God's wholeness. All of God's presence and will are in that whole. But as he says, the soul has been not only created perfect, but fully created. So now you've got this whole here. It's almost like a second God. God has created like himself and has taken all of what he is, his wholeness, and put it into this creation. So now there's this second light that shows up, and this is a soul, and yet at the same time, there isn't just one sun, because God thinks in a holographic way. It's not like God is here and God goes plop, here's the sun, here's one sun, or like here's God, and everything that God can express is expressed at once in one act, and that one act is one sun. God actually thinks holographically because when he shares, he has to give wholeness to what he creates. So he takes his wholeness and puts it into a part of him, or part of his mind, his thought, creates a soul. But he's not limited. There's a fundamental property here where when God gives something, he does not lose it. He does not diminish. He doesn't decrease. You have to give something in order to have it. This is a basic law of God's creation and God's mind. So that means that when he gives all of himself to this part and creates a soul, that's not the end of the story, because he has not lost anything. There's still the whole of God left over. Okay, this is not like water or a physical object where you got a limited amount and you take 10 gallons of water and you put it into a 10-gallon jug. There's no water left to put elsewhere. That's the ego's world. God is not like that. He's not limited. When he creates and shares and gives, he adds volume to existence. He creates additional substance of self. So by giving all of himself to his son to create a son, doesn't mean that he's sort of run out of resources, or he's used up all of his creative ability. He still is fully creative and has all of himself still to give. So he gives again, and he gives again, and he gives again. Many, 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 many creations, many, many suns, many minds, many aspects of heaven. This is why God has created many individuals in heaven, and they're real, and they can only be real because of these holographic properties, where the ego would say, no, this isn't possible. You can only have one thing making one thing, and it's all kind of finite amounts, and everything's got to be sort of measured out. That's how the ego thinks, and it's not how God thinks. God's very, very different to the ego world. So this is how it's possible for God to have many sons, many souls, many individual, free-willed individuals in heaven as part of reality, as part of his creation. Totally ego-defying, because God's nature is holographic. He creates parts that contain all of him and that share with all of him, but at the same time, he creates another part that shares all of him, and another part, and I kind of see this in my mind as kind of like a triangle. Instead of thinking of like God is up here and there's like a circular sun over here, the sun is kind of triangular in that at the top here there's a sort of a wholeness part that shares with God, and it concentrates down to a sort of a self, a part at the bottom. So down the bottom here there's individuality and many triangles, many individuals, and towards the top there's openness and sharing, and therefore, if I can do it this way, multiple triangles overlap with each other. So here's an individual sun, here's another individual sun, openness to God, sharing with God, and overlapping like this. So you've got many individuals that not only share with God, but that share and overlap with each other. And that's another form of sharing between brothers. So you still have your individuality, but you also are joined with the other things that exist, and that's God, and it's also other sons, other parts. So this is the nature of heaven. Now, I want to explain how God is omnipresent, because this is very key to understanding his holographic nature. Omnipresence means present everywhere. Now, the way the ego thinks about this is very bullshit. And so here's how God is omnipresent, okay? Over here in America, God is fully present. All of God is here. There's not like a part of God. It's not like one allotted piece of his mind that happens to be here with other bits elsewhere. All of his attention is here. All of his presence is here. The entire whole of his being is here in this country. Simultaneously, over here in Europe, it's a small world, over here in Europe, all of God is present. Every part of God is over here. There's nothing lacking. There's no parts of his mind that he sort of left behind over in America. Everything that's over in America is also over here. Fully. This is totally ego-defying, of course. So what that means is all of God is fully present in every part of existence. So over here in America, it's not that Like, if you think of like a body, like a physical body, like my body, I can't get that same thing to happen, because it's okay if I say I'm going to put my left hand over here, I can't put my left hand over here as well. It's limited to being separate from all other locations. It only shows up here. Here's the whole of my hand. There's no hand left to be over here. But God is not like that at all. And this is why God is so completely opposite to the way this world is set up. So God can be fully and totally present. All of the parts of himself, every aspect of his mind, all of himself, all of his attention, all of his mind, every part of his being is right here. All of God and all of himself and every part of his being and all aspects of his mind and his full presence is also here and up here. And this is so mind-blowingly boggling to the ego's way of thinking, and how it's made separate, isolated objects that don't share anything, and they're all split apart, and nothing can be in two places at once, kind of thing. God's omnipresent nature is that all of God is always fully present in every location at the same time. That is God's extraordinary ability to be sort of everywhere simultaneously, fully, not like, okay, here's the left half of God over here and here's the right half. Both parts are over here and both parts are over here. This is the way God is. This is what omnipresence really means. Fully present everywhere. Now, when you look at this world, this physical universe with matter, objects, the form of matter was deliberately made to try to prove that God's nature and his omnipresence are not true. So the way it does this is it says, okay, here's an object. Let's see. I have a good variety here. Here's a coin. Here's an object, and this object is different to this object. So what that instantly means is, over here, something's happening. There's some silver, and there's a different size and a different image printed on it. Over here, there's kind of a copper with a different picture, and it's a different size. Therefore, some of what's over here is not over here, and vice versa. There's a limit placed on omnipresence, so therefore, over here, only part of all possibility is here, and only part of all possibility is here. And because these two objects don't have everything, and they're not identical, this is what they'd be like if they're identical, almost, maybe. Because they're not identical, it proves and paints a picture of nothing is the same anywhere else. What is present in one location is not present in other locations. What's here is lacking something that somewhere else has that this does not have. Therefore, there's a sacrifice. And therefore, the whole is not in every part. And because the whole's not in every part, there isn't a part anywhere that the whole is existing. Therefore, the whole does not exist. This is what physical matter was made to prove, to create this picture of covering up God's omnipresent nature with a picture that's totally different to his nature. If you remember, his nature is that the whole of him is in every location, fully. Every part has all of God in it simultaneously. So if you see a picture of objects where every part is very restricted and limited, and only some of the stuff is here, and only some of the stuff is here, and the parts over here don't have the parts that are over here, it automatically means God is not anywhere. And that is why, well, basically it's saying the wholeness doesn't exist because there's clearly not everything here, and there's clearly not everything here, so nowhere is there everything. God is therefore blocked by physical matter, and his nature, his omnipresent nature, is completely opposed by physical matter, because it's showing a picture of something totally unlike how God is. So every object in this world was made on purpose by the ego thought system and the way the ego thinks to block awareness of God, to show a picture of there is no God. God is not here. God, the way that God is like cannot be seen anywhere, so therefore God doesn't exist. That's the purpose of physical matter. The ego has dreamed this physical universe on purpose to deliberately be totally different to the nature of God, so that you don't have the ability to see God's nature or realize that God is present anywhere. This is how the ego has blocked out God. And this is why this world was made to block awareness of God. So I had an experience of God a few years ago that was very life-changing and mind-blowing, where my mind opened up so much to so much awareness and so much wakefulness that I was able to see that God was in every location. I remember looking at the legs of a chair and seeing there's so much love and unconditionality and lack of judgment in this chair leg that I would not need to go anywhere else to find love. And I remember looking at a shadow on a wall and seeing, wow, there's love present in this shadow on the wall, so much so that there's not anything lacking in this location, and therefore I don't need to look at anything else in order to find where the love is. So the searching ends, and I started to see God in everything, because my mind became so expanded that God was in my mind, therefore God was in everything I see. And what it showed me was this picture of, even though I could still see physical objects, and they still were all, normally, naturally, unnaturally separated out from each other, I could also see past that, and I could recognize and be aware of the actual experience of every object had all of God in it. And so there was a sameness over here in this object. There was exactly the same full presence of God, and over in this object was the full presence of God. The differences that were presented by the objects that were illusions, ego illusions, nothing is so blinding as sight of form. This is what it means, is that when your vision stops at and believes in physical nature as though it's the truth about God's nature, and you believe it, and you can't see past it, and you can't see the omnipresence of God, and you can't see the holographic sharing of everything, how everything is connected and joined, and the whole is everywhere. You become blind. You become blinded by form. This is what the body's eyes were made for, was to make you fixate on forms so that you would not see God. So even though you have eyesight, It actually was made by the ego to make you incapable of seeing God's nature. So it fixates on physicality. Excuse me. So you think to yourself, okay, I can see stuff, therefore this is vision, I'm aware. No. The body was made to block you from having awareness. It was made to make you incapable of being in the experience of awareness of God's nature and God's presence. All the body senses that pretend that they can sense the environment and tell you what's really there and allow you to see things and sense things and smell things and taste things and hear things was made as a cover-up, a substitute to sort of blind you, to like put you in a box. You've been put inside of a box with your face in the box, and you can only peer inside the box and see what's inside the box. You can't see outside of it. That is what your vision is. It's been made so that you will only look upon error, only look upon forms of error. All physical objects are forms of the error of the belief in separation. And when you can't see past that, you have become blinded. And as I sit here and I look at this camera and I see the camera, my true vision is blinded by the physical object of this camera, because I'm not seeing the whole within it. I'm not seeing God in it right now. And it's actually therefore become a way to separate off other objects and prove to my eyesight that God doesn't exist. This is why the ego made your ability to see, because it actually is not the ability to see, it's the inability to see, it's blindness. And the more that you can see with your physical eyes, the less you are seeing God. So where was I going to go with this? So physical matter was made to block your awareness. And so what I saw in that experience was, even though I could see physical forms, I could also be aware of and see the holographic nature behind the forms, which was that all of God was in every part, in every object. There was a sameness. There was something that was consistent, something that was not different, something that was absolutely identical everywhere. Love, 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 love everywhere, as though all of God's mind and presence was in everything I could see, equally and fully, not like just, okay, there's part of God here and part over there. The whole, there was a wholeness, a unity, a perfect underlying constancy and lack of difference and sameness and identicalness. Those are the qualities of God behind the illusion of form, running kind of through the illusion of form, and the illusion of form itself looked unreal, and he was seeing past it for a while. That really taught me about the holographic, omnipresent nature of God, that he can be everywhere at once, fully and completely, without any lack and any restraint and any limitation or any compromise or and that was really educational, experientially educational, to see why this world is an illusion of things being nothing like each other, and everything's separate and everything's different and there's nothing shared. The whole point of this illusion and these forms is to make it seem as though nothing is alike anything else and everything is not shared, everything's separate, so that you don't recognize God's nature, which is very, very different to this. This was on purpose. This is an intentionally projected dream to block out awareness of God and God's nature. Now, one thing I want to say also is duality has not been fully created. This world is almost separate from God. We can't actually get outside of God, even if we dream, even if we have an extreme dream of death where we're trying to completely separate ourselves from God. You cannot do it, even in dreaming. This world is just shy of accomplishing separation, which is why the quantum entanglement shows up, proving that there is some sharing still. There's a little bit of sharing, and you can find it in these sort of reality glitches where the holographic nature of the world overcomes the illusion that everything's separate and disconnected. We didn't actually succeed in fully separating from God. We just sort of really try to push the envelope and take our mind to the extreme possible, almost sort of bursting out of God's bubble, but not quite making it. We didn't quite separate. And physical death is the sort of the end of where the ego says, okay, I succeeded at doing this. If I can die and become non-existent, that means that I've left this existence fully, and now I'm in a completely separate existence, an absolute separation. We have not been able to do that. We get close to it, and death is a picture of almost leaving God, of almost being dead and irreversible, but it's not quite there. And because it's not quite there, there's resurrection. You can't stay dead. And you can't really be fully dead ever. You can get closer to what looks like it, but so as you look at this world, you think, okay, this is duality. It's not quite duality. It's almost the most extreme attempt to break apart everything so that it looks like there is no hologram. In the high level of the hologram, everything is very, very shared. Everything is omnipresence. And then gradually differences are emphasized more and more, where the sharing between the whole and the parts is sort of gradually separated out so that it starts looking as though this thing over here has some things that this part over here doesn't have. But they're still very, very similar. And then as it comes down into the dream, those differences are emphasized more and more concretely and separately, producing at the bottommost level of the hologram this illusion that everything is very, very separate and not like anything else at all. But even at this bottom level, there is a very slight sharing still that joins everything to everything else. My physical body even contains the whole universe. Your physical body contains the whole universe still. The whole is still in every part, but it's become so obscure. The illusion of not being a hologram has taken shape. So up here we've got shared stuff, and it's kind of sort of tried to rip itself apart to the extent where you would any observer would sort of think, this doesn't have anything in common with this is totally different to this, but there is a slight connection still, and this can be proved. This is what the quantum physics is pointing to, and science is actually starting to adopt now this idea of this whole universe is a hologram, the holographic principle that 3D space is being projected from a state of what they call two-dimensionality, where everything's kind of joined and blended and kind of like a big blur, which goes towards oneness, towards wholeness. God's at the top, and then gradually things sort of separate out towards the bottom of the hologram, and we see this bottom level, the surface appearance of the holographic universe, and we think, okay, and my vision showing me the surface of these objects, but I'm blinded by this illusion, and I think I see that there's something here but it's not over here, and I think I see an object that's not that object, and we're all different and separate. That's an illusion. It's taken things that are actually joined and has tried to make them appear to be so unjoined that most observers would be pretty convinced that that there's nothing connecting them, but there clearly is. And science is starting to be able to prove that there are these quantum entanglements and things like that, where something can exist in two places at once. And the whole of a particle can be over here and over here, and this is why it's possible at the bottom of the hologram to be able to change something in this particle, and instantly it changes over here because this particle and this particle are joined at a higher level or a deeper level of the holographic dream. So actually there's actually one thing being changed. So it's almost like space itself is holographic, in that the space that's sort of represented by this blob up here can express itself in parts and show up with particles in different locations that actually are joined by this sort of higher level. This is very mind-bending stuff. It's hard to get your head around it, but this universe is a holographic dream, and it's holographic because it's God's nature to be holographic. God has created a hologram, a picture of heaven, which has many, many parts to it, and each part is individually a whole, a complete whole, because all of God was put there. So every individual is fully, wholly created as a whole, like a copy of God, and yet sharing with all of God, connected to all of God, and connected to all the other parts, sharing. And those sons of God were given free will, and individually, some of those sons, who in turn can create holographically, they can create many children, and those many children are also sharing the wholeness of the Son in each of them, many of them, and yet still individuals. It's almost like simultaneous individuality and connectedness to the whole. There's a oneness, but there's also parts. This is God's nature. This is the hologram nature. So when those parts, when an individual says, okay, I don't want to be like God, I want to cut myself off from the shared part of the whole that individual has. Remember the triangle, the individual son at the bottom of the triangle that shares all of God sort of says, I'm going to cut myself off here from the wholeness, and I'm just going to be this little piece, a part that has become isolated from the hologram or isolated from the sharing of wholeness. That is an ego, and that leads to dreaming. This is what a separate self means, really. It's not you having an individuality actually means that you're a whole that shares with the whole, but when you try to stop sharing with the whole and you're just this sort of a whole by itself that supposedly hasn't come from the main whole of God, the Creator, that isolation of that whole self is an ego idea, and that's what produces the ego individual self, the separated off self that doesn't share. When you're in your natural state, you are supposed to be sharing with the whole of the source of your holographic self. And the part of you that shares with the whole, with God, and with the rest of the wholes, remember the many suns that all have triangles, the shared part is the one sun. The sharing part is Christ. This is why God experiences the sonship, which contains many individuals, simultaneously, because he's the source of this hologram. He is the one whole that's everywhere and omnipresent, and all of him is in each sun. All of him extends to each sun. All of him gives a revelation to each sun. So from his point of view, he's got this sort of multiple creations going on at once, simultaneous projections of himself. And so he is simultaneously experiencing every sun as one creation. That's why he experiences it as one sun. This is where the idea of there being one sun comes from, is the sharing between the many suns and the wholeness. Does not mean that there is only one individual, because it's actually an omnipresent, simultaneous multitude of creations that are overlapping and sharing, and they're joined. And God is not like the ego. It's not, okay, one blob up here and a separate blob down here. That's ego thinking, black and white logic. This is why many people cannot get their head around how God has many sons, because when they think about it, they think, okay, there's Jesus talking about one son, so that must mean there's one kind of thing and it's separate from something else, and there can't be many parts because that violates ego logic, and that seems to be false. But when you've got the holographic model of heaven, every individual son is also sharing with the whole and is a picture of the whole, in a sense, and sharing with each other and overlapping. It defies all the ego's logic and all of the rationale and justifications that people use to say, oh, there's only one, or there can't be parts, there's no separations. It's a very different reality. It's a very different world. It's a very different kind of experience where it's not like this world, so it's kind of hard to relate to it. And this is why many people get stuck on this idea that there's only one dreamer. There isn't one dreamer. There are many dreamers, because there are many parts of this holographic creation. Some of them have dreamed, and some of them have not. And you waking up and choosing atonement just means you're choosing to reconnect yourself to the whole that created you as a hologram. It doesn't mean that the other parts are doing the same thing. They're still choosing to be ego by trying to not share. So you cannot choose for other people, and you cannot violate their free will, and Jesus can't violate your free will, and God's not going to violate your free will. Because we all share kind of a collective holographic reality that isn't just one thing. It's not just the oneness. It's not just this is all God. There are individuals. There are wholes within wholes. This is ego-defying logic. It doesn't seem to make sense, but it actually is the way things are. So the interesting thing about a hologram also is that it becomes symbolic when it gets into the ego's way of using it. And this is why we call it a dream, because dreams are made of symbols. Now, a symbol, my body's a symbol of separation. everything in this physical world is a symbol, because this is a dream. Everything symbolizes something else and is not a thing in itself. So if you understand a hologram, then the single sun, the part, symbolizes the whole. It's a representation of the whole. So like a symbol for God could be a circle, because in some ways it's similar to God's nature. God is a whole and he's sort of self-contained and stuff, so that's symbolic. Everything in this world is actually a part of a dream, and everything that happens is symbolic. Every object is a symbol. They're not ends within themselves. They're not finite, concrete things that have their own identity or their own will or their own mind. They actually stem from or are projected by something else, a hidden kind of reality. The higher hologram projects from the mind and creates these forms that symbolize what's in the mind. And this is why when you have dreams at night, your dreams are very symbolic, and you'll see things in your dream that represent things, because they're not things in themselves. So you'll get, like, say you had a run-in with some person years ago, and they're a sworn enemy, and you have a dream at night where this person shows up. It's because that person is a perfect symbol for something in your life or your mind or whatever. They're a good example of a certain state of being or a certain type of person or whatever. Everything in this world is a symbol, which means that it leads to the thing that it's coming from, or it leads to the thing that is representing. And this is why the body itself is not a thing. It's not a living object in its own right. It symbolizes what my mind is doing. So what often happens is certain beliefs in my mind turn into certain physical ailments in the body. Depending on kind of the subject matter of those beliefs, different parts of the body become sick to symbolize that belief. So you could get like you wanted to express some anger at somebody, but you didn't really want to say it because you felt guilty, but you really felt rage inside from something they did to you in the past, and so you sort of hold on to your words and don't speak your mind, and you don't get it off your chest. That can kind of strangle you, and you get sore throats from that. And sometimes people can carry the weight of the world on their shoulders and feel too responsible, and they start getting back pain and shoulder pain. You have like a romantic thing happen where you're swept off your feet and you become weak-kneed. Your knees literally become weakened because what's happening in your mind. People create headaches as sort of a way of saying, you're giving me a headache, or I don't like you. People create headaches to avoid people. I had a problem with my eyes once and found out that it's because I saw something that I was angry about seeing, and it showed up as a sort of an angry attack in my eye area. The body is a symbol representing the mind because it's holographic. What's in my mind is the source of this hologram, this holographic body, shows up, sort of narrows down to a part of the body in a holographic way and expresses there as a representation of this bigger idea up in my mind. So pretty much every sickness is in some way symbolic of certain beliefs, certain thoughts and behavior and ways of looking at things, because it's a dream. It's a symbolic dream, and symbolism is a natural part of holograms. The part symbolizes the whole. The whole is represented in the part. The part is a representative of more than itself, so it doesn't really have its own sort of identity. It's a introduction to, or sort of a condensed version of some other thing. It doesn't have its own identity. That's why bodies don't have their own identity. You're not a body. So this is just very interesting. This is how God thinks. The Course says this is how God thinks. He thinks in terms of, if you can get the idea of the whole is in every part is a whole, because the wholeness has given all of itself to it. Talking too much. So I want to make that point again. So it says the whole is in every part is a whole. So souls have been fully created because God's given all of himself to them. They are autonomous wholes within the whole of God. They are individuals. They do have their own will. They are like God in every way. And this is why God has created a sonship with many souls, many individual free-willed beings who also create many individual free-willed beings. And this is all possible because God is a holographic thinker. His mind functions this way. His omnipresence guarantees that all of him must be present in every location, and therefore every location is a little picture of a mini God, a soul. And the Course even says that he's created souls in number infinite numbers of parts, infinite souls, infinite individual free will beings that are part of his holographic mind. Now what happens is, and this is where everybody messes up, because they don't understand that God is a hologram, and God creates parts that are wholes, and they share with the whole, and they also overlap each other. They take the ego mind and they look at this picture, and the ego is very isolating, and it wants to put something into a rigid box and say, this is this, but it's not that. This is cut off from that. This is separate from this. When you look at a hologram with that kind of attitude, that kind of thinking, you will come to so many false conclusions, because now you're going to say, I and the Father are one, therefore I have to section off I from Father. That would be separation. There's no separation, so there can't be that, so there's only a oneness. False. Or if I have an individuality in heaven, it must mean that I'm separate from God. False, because you also share with the whole. Or people will cut off the individuals and ignore the individual souls and focus on the part that shares with the whole, that shares with God. Focus just on that level of the hologram, and they'll say, look, there's only one sun. Here's a statement that suggests there's only one sun. Sometimes Jesus talks about that shared part of the hologram that many parts share omnipresently, and ignore the other part. They separate off the other part because it doesn't make ego sense, because ego can't make sense of this the way it thinks. And then they'll say that means, or this proves that there aren't many suns, or God can't possibly have many suns because it doesn't make sense logically. It doesn't make sense to the ego's logic, because the ego does not think holographically. It thinks separated off, buys into the illusion of things being distinct and separate, buys into the illusion of form, that something over here is not over here, and God is not present here, so he's not present here, and only part of something is here, and this has different qualities than this, so therefore they're not the same and they're not connected. That's how the ego thinks, because this world is made of the ego's thought system. It's in the ego's thought system, its mind. This world is the ego. And because people's minds also think this way, typically, because we've bought into this illusion so badly that we actually start thinking in terms of separate things, and this is not like that, and these things are different, and that's not the same as this, and different rules apply over here and over here. Our mind takes on a kind of a sort of maps to physical forms, the nature of physical forms and their illusion, creates a way of thinking that is a reflection of that illusion, thinks that that's real, thinks that this is natural, normal way to think. It is not. That is the ego's way of thinking, and all of the logical reasoning that comes within that system automatically shuts out God, automatically blinds you to the nature of God's creation, automatically is a belief in form and a belief in separateness. And so whenever it looks at any statements in the Course about heaven or God's creation or God's nature or the Holy Spirit's thought system or the sonship or souls or a son of God or anything to do with anything inside heaven, they look with the ego, with that very bought into the illusion, non-holographic thought system, look at it, are totally puzzled by what they see. I don't understand how there can be a part down here, but it's also a hole, and it's joined to a hole, and there are many holes. Tries to split it up and tries to join things together to make sense of it, and it's just total fail. Total fail, because you can't think that way. You can't sort of think with like a rigid separate boxes way of looking at a world that is not separate boxes, where things overlap and where all of God is over here, and there's a sharing, and there's an omnipresence where the entirety of God's being is here and here and here without any loss or any lack, because there's absolute sharing of every part of himself infinitely, like infinite layers of self. You try to look at that with little boxes and little separate ways of thinking and cutting things up and comparing them, you just will not agree with what Jesus has said in the Course. You will see it blindly and very differently, and it will skew it, and it will make it look like he's saying things that he's not saying, and that he's meaning things that he does not mean. And everybody's doing this, and they're coming to false conclusions. There's only one sun. That's the ego. There's only one dreamer. That's the ego. There's only one will. That's the ego. There's no individuals. Individuals are ego. That's ego. So we've come up with this version of the Course with the ego's thinking that is bullshit. Blinded by forms, looking at formless, abstract, omnipresent, holographic reality with a very, very restricted, limited ego way of thinking and looking. So, sharing, that's why sharing is the key aspect of heaven. Everything overlaps and shares with everything else. There's this wholeness. My wholeness shares with God's wholeness. Your wholeness shares with God's wholeness. Your wholeness also shares with my wholeness. And yet there are parts, because all of God is in every location, that has to mean the entirety of God is right here as a part, as a self, as an individual, and over here as an individual. This is the holographic nature of reality, the holographic nature of heaven, the holographic nature of God's mind, how God thinks. He thinks this way, he creates this way, completely natural. This is not the same thing as saying oneness or non-duality. They're very vague ego concepts. They are not good representations, because oneness suggests there's only this sort of sharing part and there's no parts. It's not the way God is. God is holographic and he creates parts. And the Course has said this, and it'll say, like, one brother is all brothers and one mind contains all minds. Doesn't mean there aren't many minds. It's not deleting its own statement there. It actually means there are many minds, and each mind contains the whole of the rest of creation. All of heaven is shared by every individual. Every individual is connected to the whole. We're all sharing and having a mutual concurrent experience of the same stuff together as many. This is the nature of heaven. This is the nature of God's creation, and it spills over into the ego's dreaming. This is how we've holographically created a universe that, or even many universes, that gradually become more and more separated off. The illusion that things are not the same in every location gradually solidifies more and more, and solid matter is the idea of that final solidifying of this idea of this object here is totally separate from this thing over here. They don't share anything. There's no connection. Therefore, God is dead. That's the whole point of physical matter. To obscure God's nature, make you incapable of seeing God. So you got to see past it with your mind and recognize the holographic oneness of God's mind. So I think I'm going to kind of wrap up there. I guess I could go on a bit more about this, but I run out of storage. So God is a holographic thinker. You're a holographic thinker. This dream is a hologram. It's not quite duality because it's not all the way separate from God. It's almost duality, and there is a slight connection between everything. As the Course says, even the dream had to be kept within the laws of God. We have not escaped God's mind. We have not fully left his existence. So there's a very slight sharing still in the world. Death is supposed to be the final effort to totally separate from God as the final conclusion of sin, but even death is not an escape from the existence from the hologram, which is why it can be reversed, because it's not quite absolute death, it's only relative. So nobody can ever really fully die. There is only life. There's no life outside of heaven. So hopefully this has in some way been understandable, and probably diagrams would have helped. There's a whole bunch of YouTube videos out there about holographic creation. Look up the holographic universe. There's videos about the book and about the general idea of it. There are many websites out there describing the science behind this, and science is actually now starting to accept more and more that this world really does seem to function like a hologram. And we're finding evidence to actually prove it. So you are one of the parts of the hologram, and you share with all of God and with all of your brothers, yet still are a part. You are a whole within yourself. You are a being. You are a being of God. God loves you. I guess that's it for today. Tally ho. Love you.